Great. Okay, so without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. So we have our senior expert, Torben, from the SPEAC project. And the SPEAC project team is led by team leader Gianluca. It's a pleasure to have him, like you both. And then from HQTS, we have Duc, our business development manager from our Vietnam office. In Vietnam, we have a HQTS office and a testing lab as well. So what I might do now, I'll hand over the floor to Gianluca, where he'll give a keynote speech, and then Torben will follow with his presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for this introduction. My name is Gianluca Chiara, and I am the team leader of the SPEAC project. And for me, it's a great honor to join this webinar today. As mentioned, the SPEAC project and HQTS are long-lasting friends, and we have been cooperating for many years in China and in Vietnam. Our senior expert, Torben, during his presentation, will give you also some insight about the SPEAC project, how we operate, why the SPEAC project was initiated by the European Commission. The key message that I would like to give you today is about, of course, the importance of product safety and compliance. And the reason why we started 3 years ago the cooperation also with HQTS Vietnam, it's because we see an increasing export of Vietnamese product towards the EU. EU and Vietnam are great friends. We have ongoing very relevant cooperation programs. But of course, as always, we emphasize that Vietnamese products are more than welcome on EU territory as long as, of course, they follow EU requirements. And this is the reason of this webinar, to give you an insight on the latest EU rules in terms of product safety and some practical insights when it's time to export to the EU. So without any further overdue, I would like again to thank HQTS and HQTS Vietnam for organizing this event, our senior expert Torben for joining us, and you all that you are attending. I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon and interesting training. Bye.
Thank you very much, Gianluca, for this introduction, and thank you very much from me as well to HQTS for inviting us for this webinar. It's a big pleasure for me to give this presentation on the product safety framework for the European Union, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. Let me just try to share my screen if I can make it work. I think Anthony, you might just want to open the opportunity so I can share it.
Yes, I've just allowed for that permission. You can try again now, Torben.
Okie doke. Thanks a lot. And then let me see. Yeah, here we go. A short introduction to the legal framework for product safety in the EU. And my purpose with this presentation is to provide an understanding of how the legal framework works and give you some input telling you how you can deal with this framework in practice. During my presentation, I will try to cover these topics. We will start by discussing the legal framework to get this basic understanding. Next, the legal framework defines some roles and responsibilities for all the businesses in the supply chain. So I will discuss how can we deal with this and how do you handle this, these responsibilities in practice. Third, even if businesses do everything they can, there is a chance that something goes wrong from time to time. And then the question is, how do you handle a product safety issue in practice? I will also discuss that briefly. And finally, let me say that if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to enter it in the chat. We will have people who will monitor this chat and take the questions forward so that we can discuss them in a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. But getting started, understanding the legal framework for product safety in the EU. There are a number of main legislations, you can say, that governs the product safety in the EU. The first one, probably the most important, is the General Product Safety Regulation, also commonly known as GPSR. You will see that I have inserted a QR code here, which will take you to, it's a link to the Commission website where you can read the directive, all the text for this regulation. All the legal texts are available for free from the Commission's website. Next to the General Product Safety Regulation, we also have the Market Surveillance Regulation, commonly known under the number 2019/1020. We have more legislation because we also have directives and regulations covering all the CE marked products. So for instance, you may be familiar with the Low Voltage Directive or the Toy Safety Directive or the Directive for Personal Protective Equipment. I've inserted this QR code that will link you to a website on the Commission's website where you can see all these directives listed and where you can access them. I think personally that it's a very, very useful link, so I strongly recommend that you bookmark it right away. It's something I visit almost every day in my professional work. There's more legislation out there governing product safety, but we're not covering that today. Something addresses e-commerce issues, and then there's legislation on consumer rights and on consumer protection. But as I said, we're not going into these legal acts today. A few words about the main principles underlying the product safety work. One thing is that in the European Union, we expect the businesses to take the responsibility for the safety of the product. In practice, this means there is no EU body that must approve a product before it can be placed on the market. If the manufacturer has produced a product and ensures that it is safe and complies with the rule, he is free to place it on the market without any further ado. As I said, we have a number of actors in the supply chain. They have different roles, and these roles determine their obligations and their rights. But basically, all businesses in the supply chain are responsible for preventing that unsafe products end up in the hands of the consumers. The responsibility is shared by everybody, and all are responsible for doing this. All actors are expected to react if they discover that a product is unsafe. And finally, it's important that there is somebody in the EU who is responsible for the safety if a product is placed on the market. Regarding the technical requirements, the philosophy is that all products must be safe. This is the basic principle. All products must be safe, no exceptions. Many products must be CE marked, but it's not all products that must be CE marked. And moreover, if the legislation does not require the CE mark to be put on the product, it is even illegal to place it there. So you should be careful to figure out if your product needs to be CE marked or is not allowed to be CE marked. Then the idea is that the product safety legislation establishes essential safety requirements that on a broad term describes how safe a product must be. The manufacturers must ensure that their products meet these essential safety requirements. In practice, this is difficult if you just look at the safety requirements, and therefore we have the harmonized standards. And the idea is that if you comply with the harmonized standards, you can presume that your product meets the essential safety requirements. This is what we call presumption of conformity. If a manufacturer wants to produce a safe and compliant product, then these are the stages that he would go through. First of all, he would have to identify the directives covering the product. Then he would identify the harmonized standards that apply to the product, because that would allow him to identify the test requirements. The fourth stage is the testing of the product. You can do it yourself, or you can subcontract a laboratory for most products. And then finally, you need to compile the technical documentation that demonstrates that you have produced a safe and compliant product. And if the product has to be CE marked, then you need to draw up the declaration of conformity and you have to affix the CE mark. I'm not going to go into further detail with this one today, but it will be the topic of one of the subsequent webinars we will be giving. I said that we expect businesses to be responsible and take responsibility for the safety of the products. On top of that, the EU member states have designated market surveillance authorities to monitor the market and to see that the businesses actually resume the responsibility. What they do is that they sample products from the market and they test them. These are random samples, and they are tested just to check that they actually comply with the safety requirements in the legislation. Moreover, these market surveillance authorities may also inspect businesses in the supply chain to check that they actually follow up on complaints and that they actually monitor product safety. And they would also often ask how this is done. So just to sum up, safety is key. All products on the market must be safe, and there's no exception to this. Second, all businesses in the supply chain are responsible for the product safety. In practice, we know that the manufacturer carries the largest responsibility, because if the manufacturer gets it right from the beginning, then chances are very, very high that a compliant product would end up on the market. And finally, if products do not meet the basic requirements, then they are removed from the market by the authorities and by the businesses. That much about the basic understanding of the product safety framework. Now let me move to a discussion of roles and responsibilities and how to deal with these in practice. The product safety legislation defines a number of roles that businesses can take in the supply chain. And if we start with the very traditional supply chain, then you can imagine that you have a manufacturer who produces a product, then an importer purchases that product and brings it into the European Union. And finally, the importer sells the product to a distributor who would sell the product on to retailers and sell them to the consumers. These are the classical roles that you will find in the traditional supply chains. It will be a little complicated. The role of the manufacturer will be a little complicated when we're talking private labeling or rebranding, but I will get back to that in a moment. On top of these three traditional roles, then we have two new ones. We've got the fulfillment house, which is a business that sells transport, labeling services, distributes goods to consumers. They probably run storage facilities, but they don't own the products. They just have the products are stored at their facilities. And likewise, we have the authorized representative. It's possible for a manufacturer to designate a person or a business in the European Union to speak on their behalf when it comes to product safety. I'll come back to that in much more detail in a little while. But if we go to the manufacturer, then the definition in the legislation says that a manufacturer is any natural or legal person, so a person or a business who manufactures a product. That's the easy and the most obvious way to understand it. A manufacturer, that's somebody who will manufacture a product. But then legislation also says that a manufacturer can also be somebody who has a product designed or manufactured and markets that product under his own name or trademark. And this is where you have the private labeling. You may think of a business like Nike, the big sports shoe manufacturer. I am absolutely certain that they have a lot of shoes manufactured in factories in Vietnam. But still, if you look at the shoe, it is marked Nike, and everything that you see in the shoe will tell you that this is a Nike shoe made by Nike, even if reality is that the shoes have been made in a factory somewhere in Vietnam. This is what I call private labeling or rebranding. Let me just move to the obligations of the manufacturer and briefly discuss them. The manufacturer's obligation is, of course, to make safe products. And it is his obligation to compile the technical documentation. He's the only one who can do this because he has got the detailed knowledge about his product, so he knows how it has been constructed, etc. Then the manufacturer must mark the product with the product name, the model name, a serial number, a batch number, and his own contact details. If the product is CE marked, then the manufacturer must also draw up and sign a declaration of conformity for the product. And finally, we have this general provision that he is obliged to react if he discovers any product safety issues. Just a quick comment on the contact details. Legislation defines contact details as the full postal address of the operator. It must be possible to send a letter to this business. The contact details must also include the telephone number, and it must include the email address or other electronic means by which consumers can contact the manufacturer. And then let me discuss private labeling a little bit more. In private labeling, you have these two roles, you can say. You have got the factory that manufactures the product in practice, and then you got the private label owner who puts his mark on the product so that it is seen as being the private label owner's product. And finally, the products are sold to the consumer by the private label owner. If you try to look at the different responsibilities we just discussed, then it's obvious that it is the factory that must design and manufacture the safe product. That is what the private label owner buys from them. It's also clear that it must be the factory that compiles and maintains the technical documentation. Again, they're the only ones who can do this, because they know their product. But then when it comes to marking, it must be the private label owner's contact details that must be printed on the product, not the factory. It's the private label owner that takes on the responsibility. It's a private label owner that acts as the manufacturer in this case. So therefore, it's the private label owner's contact details that must be in the product. It must also be the private label owner that signs the declaration of conformity if the product is CE marked, and it will be the private label owner that communicate with the EU market surveillance authorities. One thing to note is that if something goes wrong, then it is the manufacturer, as indicated on the product, who carries the full responsibility for the product, and that is the party that a market surveillance authority will go back to. This creates some confidentiality issues in practice, because legislation says that the private label owner must ascertain that the technical documentation has been compiled, that it's correct, and that it is complete. And legislation also says that the private label owner must be ready to send the full technical documentation to a market surveillance authorities, including any commercially sensitive information that the factory may have put there. How would you handle that in practice? Because the factory would not be very willing to hand out their secret information to the factory, to the private label owner, because there is, of course, a risk that the private label owner may take everything and go to another factory and say, can you do it cheaper? How can you work around this? Well, one thing is that the factory could perhaps compile the technical documentation and then send the full table of contents to the private label owner to say, look, we have prepared the information, it's here, and you can ask for it if you need it. It might also be an idea to invite the private label owner to the factory to check that the documentation is there. Of course, the private label owner is not allowed to take copies or photographs of anything, but he can check and verify the documentation is there. Or you could perhaps imagine that the private label owner pays an independent body like a certification body or a test institute to check that information and issue some sort of declaration that the information is complete. Finally, you can imagine that the private label, the factory could send some non-secret documents like test reports could be sent to the private label owner and show that the documentation is there and you can use it. And of course, the agreement between the two parties should also include some non-disclosure agreements or non-disclosure provisions. Then we have this question of how to deal with private label. When private label owner is asked from an EU market surveillance authority to send information, how do you deal with that? Well, one thing is that the factory could suggest to the private label owner that if a market surveillance authority asks for information, then the factory will send it directly to the market surveillance authority and bypass the private label owner. This is possible because the employees in the market surveillance authorities are requested to maintain full professional secrecy. They're not allowed to share any sort of confidential or sensitive information with anybody. So the factory can send that information in full confidence that it will remain between the two parties, the manufacturer and the factory. No, sorry, the market surveillance authority and the factory. Then let me move on to discuss the obligations of the importer. The importer is obliged to acquire the declaration of conformity, to check it, and to keep it for at least 10 years if the product is CE marked. The importer must also verify that the technical documentation is there, that it is complete and correct, and he must be prepared to deliver any information about the product, including the full technical documentation, to a market surveillance authority if they ask for it. And this obligation rests for a period of 10 years after the last product has been sold. Then the importer must check that the marking is there and that the user instructions are there and in the correct languages. And he must have his contact details printed on the product. And the general provision, he is obliged to react on product safety issues if he discovers these. If you look at the distributor, then his obligations are simpler. He must check the marking and the user instruction and verify that they are there in the correct language. Then the legislation says that he must store and handle products so that safety isn't compromised. And finally, the general provision, he must react on product safety issues. Then we had other actors in the supply chain, the authorized representative and the fulfillment house. These are interested because they may take on the role of a responsible person. And who is then the responsible person? Well, that's yet another party that has been defined in legislation recently. So if you look in Article 4 of Regulation 2019/1020, or you look in the GPSR in Article 19, you will find a description of the responsible person and the obligations such a person will have. First of all, it is mandatory to have somebody who is responsible if you are going to bring a product to the EU market. Somebody must be responsible for that product. That person must be physically established in the EU. It's not sufficient to just have a letterbox somewhere. And this person or business must be empowered so that it can act on behalf of the manufacturer if any issues related to product safety comes up regarding this product. You may then ask, who can then take on this role of being a responsible person? Well, in some cases, it is easy because it's given by the supply chain. If the manufacturer is present in the EU because they have a subsidiary or they may have a sales office or something else, then it would be natural to have that manufacturer take on the role as responsible person. If you sell via an importer who takes the goods into the European Union, then that importer would normally take the role as being responsible person. And then it's possible for the fulfillment house to take on board the role, which in practice means that the fulfillment house will ask traders for quite a lot of information and documentation for the products if they're going to take on the role as fulfillment house. And finally, it's possible for a manufacturer to designate an authorized representative and mandate that one to solve the jobs of the responsible person. If you look at the tasks and obligations for the responsible person, then you can see them in this slide. The responsible person must check that the declaration of conformity exists, and he must store it for at least 10 years after the last product has been sold, if the product is CE marked. But for all products, he must verify that the technical documentation exists. He must be able to react on requests from EU market surveillance authorities and send any kind of information or documentation that they ask for. He is obliged to react on product safety issues if he discovers these, and he is obliged to help solve such issues if they come around. And finally, the responsible person's contact detail must be marked on the product. This is easy if it is the manufacturer or the importer who will be the responsible person. If it is somebody else, then you need to add that address to the product. Then you can ask, how do you designate an authorized representative? And the legislation contains some requirements that you need to deal with. First of all, legislation says that the responsible person or the authorized representative must be mandated to solve the tasks that we just discussed in the previous slide. In practice, you have to write up a mandate. You have to have a written mandate with your authorized representative. And you should be prepared, or you should know that the EU market surveillance authorities can actually see that the mandate has been drawn up and see what it costs. They can ask for it and you are obliged to deliver it. And finally, legislation says that the authorized representative must have adequate means so that he can actually solve these tasks that he is responsible for. If you want to go deeper into this topic, then there is a guideline developed by the European Commission and a number of member states. You will find it on this QR code. It discusses how to nominate a responsible person and how to nominate an authorized representative. So I would strongly recommend it. Then finally, let's have a look at what to do if things go wrong. How do you handle product safety issues in practice? Well, the legislation, the General Product Safety Regulation, places some obligations on the manufacturers. It says that manufacturers must check that their products remain in conformity with the safety requirements when they have started or entered the mass manufacturing stage. So in practice, this means you need to operate some sort of quality assurance system. Not necessarily something that is certified, not necessarily an ISO 9001 system, but you need to have some sort of quality system in place. Then the legislation says that you must operate a consumer complaints register, and you must analyze any consumer complaint that relate to product safety. And even more, you are obliged to follow up on product safety issues like we've discussed for all the different parties in the supply chain. What is important is that you must be prepared to document that this is actually undertaken. So you need to keep some records showing that you have tested a number of products, what the results were. You must be able to show the consumer complaints register, etc. We recommend from the SPEAC project that you follow a 4-stage approach to handle product issues, and I've listed the 4 stages here. First stage is, of course, to detect the incident. You must be able to detect all incidents that potentially have some safety issues in them. Second stage is to analyze the issue to see if it actually does contain or include some product safety issues. Third, if there are product safety issues, you must define corrective measures and implement them. And fourth, we strongly recommend that you learn and improve from all the incidents you discover so that you can improve steadily. If I go a little bit deeper into the 4 stages, first stage was detecting potential safety issues, and they can be detected through different sources. One is obviously the production control. If you control your input, if you control the process, if you control batches, it will inevitably from time to time prompt that products are sliding out of conformity, so you need to do something. So that would be one important source. Consumer complaints is another very good source. Consumers use products in real life, you can say, without understanding and how the product can best be used. So it's possible there to gain some very useful experience that you also need to put into your product safety work. And finally, there are other sources like the EU Safety Gate. You can monitor legislation, see when that changes, standardization, see when that changes. And there are even other sources like test campaigns undertaken by consumer organizations and that sort of thing. All are good sources that will feed your product safety work. Second step is to analyze the issue and to develop solutions. First of all, you must analyze all issues that have some element of product safety in them, because then you need to assess if you need to take action on this. I would say that a good analysis would at least consider the questions or the topics that I've listed here. First of all, I would start by describing the situation, and I would definitely describe the risk that is posed by the product. How serious is it? What can happen? You also need to describe the necessary corrective actions that business must take. And it's a very good idea to discuss the preventative actions that will prevent this issue from reoccurring. And finally, I would say that an action plan would or must include a timeline telling you what to do when to resolve the issue. If you look a little bit deeper into this action plan, I would say these are the elements that you must include, and there could be more, of course. First thing is to consider, what do you want to do with products that have already been manufactured and that are non-compliant? Consider that these products may be different places in the supply chain. They may be at the consumers, they may be at shops, they may be at different stocks, including the manufacturer stocks, or they may be in other places, like for instance in a container on its way from Vietnam to Europe. You may decide to take different measures against the different products depending upon their position, and that should be described in the action plan. You will most likely need to modify the product to make it safe again, so you need to describe what modifications are necessary. Could be change of raw materials, change of components, modifications of design, etc. Likewise, you need to describe if it's necessary to change anything in the production line. And then I think it's important to consider, what sort of communication do you want to send out? Communication would be to the consumers, the end users, to the ones who have bought your products, so the importers, etc. What do you want to communicate to the general public? And do you want to communicate to any other parties? And finally, as I said, a good action plan will include a timeline, and I would argue that it would also include a budget for what would this cost the company to resolve. Then third, you need to implement the corrective actions. I'm not going to say a lot about that because that would you would have that information in the action plan. I would just like to remind you that it is compulsory to report corrective actions to the member states where the product has been sold. And this reporting must be done using the Safety Business Gateway. You can see that I've inserted the QR code with a link to the gateway. One obstacle here is that it is only businesses established in the EU that can report corrective actions into this system. So this is where you need to involve your responsible person, because the responsible person can fulfill this, can do this work for you. And then finally, you need to learn and improve. So you would need to consider preventative actions so that would help you avoid that this issue would ever reoccur. And some questions you can ask yourself and should answer in this is, how and when was this issue actually discovered? Is it possible for you to improve your detection system so you can discover the issue earlier on before the consequences grow big? You should also ask yourself, is it possible to improve the product, or is it possible to improve the manufacturing process so that you can make your product more robust against changes from the outside? And finally, is it possible for you to monitor the use of the products? Is it possible to improve your monitoring of the standards or the legislation? Again, the idea is that it's important that you catch these issues as soon as possible before the consequences grow huge. One final remark from my side is that the European Commission has developed this very good guideline on recall effectiveness together with a number of EU market surveillance authorities. It's a very good guideline, so I would strongly recommend you to download it and check it. It provides guidance on how to run a recall process, all the practical steps that you need to take on the way. And you would be able to download it from the QR code you can see in the slide. This was more or less what I wanted to say. Let me just finish with a few words about the SPEAC project. The SPEAC project has produced a wealth of very interesting knowledge that would be interesting and useful for manufacturers to help them produce safe products. The first tool is found behind the top QR code here. It is called the SPEAC Finder. It's a comprehensive library of fact sheets that describes all you need to know about product safety. A lot of these fact sheets addresses specific products and how you want to manufacture those. And then some of these fact sheets addresses different steps or stages in the product safety process. And in the bottom, you have a link to the SPEAC Academy. It's an e-learning tool with videos, presentations, PowerPoints, all sorts of information that will help you learn about product safety, what you can learn at your own speed. And if you want to repeat something, you can go backwards and see that again. Apart from that, there is a wealth of information stored on the SPEAC website. So you find the QR code here in the blue rectangle, where you can find information about the SPEAC project. You'll see all the knowledge that we have developed. In the red square, you will see the link to the WeChat account, and we very much like you to get in touch with the SPEAC project if you have any questions or issues coming up. That was what I wanted to say. Let me now hand back to Minduk for the next chapter. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Torben. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay. Okay, so thank you so much, Torben. So this time I will take a short time to introduce about HQTS. We are the third party for quality assurance and quality control service. And this year also, this is the 30 years anniversary of HQTS. First of all, some brief introduction about HQTS. HQTS has over 30 years experience supporting the global supply chain management. We operate in more than 20 countries and serving more than 80 markets across the consumer product, industrial, and government sector. Our international accredited laboratory for VLAS, CNAS, for ISO 17020 and 17025. So this will help us to perform the testing service for those who are caring for the product quality before exporting to Europe and also to America. And also they can like a referral for their quality standard and to double check with them. Okay. And in Vietnam, as I mentioned, that we have the in-house laboratory to enable enable to support our local market in Vietnam. Okay. Okay. Next slide. Okay. For our industry, we are more focused on the consumer product, including footwear, electrical, hardline, apparel, and textiles. However, we also open and develop for other product industry as well. So if you have any inquiry for the consumer product or even e-commerce or industrial, you also can contact us. So what we have support our client here, there are 6 main service that we are and solution that we support to our client. First of all, audit and inspection, testing, product compliance consultancy, quality engineering, and sustainable solution. Okay. For the testing, we since we have the in-house lab in Vietnam and also we also have in-house in China, we can perform the physical testing, chemical testing, and material safety, including like ROS, CPS, IA, SHAJA, ASTM, and ISO. Those can conduct in the lab in Vietnam and also the lab in China as well. Okay, for the product compliance, we together with SPEAC and also the Torben, we do the advice to our exporter and manufacturer to meet the EU, US, and global requirement with so that they can save time and save cost, and also they are clear with the document and also the restrict the regulation of those exporting market as well. Yeah, that's it all for us. And for the last one, I just want to say that HQTS will help you to save time and cost and also protect your brand reputation when you export to the new market. And those are also the strict market as well. And our local team in Vietnam and also around the world can work closely with you to make sure that the client and the factory in Vietnam can comply with the regulation. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Duc, for introducing what we do at HQTS. And also big thank you to Torben as well for that very informative presentation and share. What we might do now is we'll jump straight into our Q&A section. We've got a few good questions. As I was reviewing the questions, I actually noticed, I think Torben had addressed many of these questions already in the presentation slides. So what we might do is, I'll go through them anyway, but do also note we have the PPT slides that we will be able to share in emails along with our playback recording. Okay, so first question here submitted before our webinar actually started. We had some registrants had an opportunity to actually submit questions beforehand. So we'll be going through those first. And then we also have some live questions. I think Jade Huynh has already submitted hers. If you have any other questions, feel free to message us in the chat box in this webinar, and we'll address them at the end of this Q&A as well. Okay. I might trouble Duc as well to give a live Vietnamese translation. I'll ask the first question now. First question. Who can be a responsible person established in the EU? Exactly who can serve as the responsible person and how much legal liability do they have? Torben?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The responsible person can be the manufacturer or the importer or the fulfillment house or an authorized representative.
Oh, Duc, sorry, you're muted, Duc.
So I will, okay. So, đầu tiên thì mình sẽ nói về tiếng Việt trước. Câu hỏi là ai có thể là người chịu trách nhiệm, responsible person, được thành lập tại EU. Chính xác thì ai có thể đóng vai trò là người chịu trách nhiệm và họ phải chịu trách nhiệm pháp lý ở mức nào? Thì câu trả lời câu đầu tiên đó là người chịu trách nhiệm có thể là nhà sản xuất, nhà nhập khẩu hoặc đơn vị thực hiện dịch vụ hoàn tất đơn hàng hoặc đại diện được ủy quyền. Yes, Torben.
Yeah, I was
Torben,
just
maybe.
going to say regarding the legal liability, I'm not an expert in that part, but the legislation lays down some obligations or some tasks that the responsible person must fulfill. And of course, the authorities will check that he actually does so.
Vậy, người chịu trách nhiệm có thể có nhiều nghĩa vụ khác nhau và sẽ phải chịu trách nhiệm pháp lý nếu không thực hiện được các nghĩa vụ này.
Wonderful. Just to chime in a little bit on this point as well, I think at HQTS, what we've been able to see are some brands that either have subsidiaries local in the EU or offices there that act as a responsible person. There are consultants as well that we've worked with in the past, where the consultants, they take clients and they become the responsible person, and that's a dedicated service as well.
That's a picture I also see.
Yeah. So I'll move into the second question now. So second question here is, what is an approximate cost and timeline to make a single SKU EU compliant? So that includes testing, tech files, DOC, responsible person. And what are the likely financial and commercial consequences if non-compliance is discovered after market entry?
Thanks for that question. I think I will deal with the second half, and then I hope that you will deal with the first half about the costs. It can be very costly to have a non-compliant product on the market because it may, in extreme cases, end up with an order to recall the product, take it back from the consumers, and destroy it. And you can only guess how costly that would be if it's a bestseller that has been on the market.
Ok.
Um,
Và câu
Sorry,
hỏi
Doc.
thứ hai, câu hỏi thứ hai là chi phí và thời gian ước tính để làm tuân thủ cho một mã sản phẩm tuân thủ theo tiêu chuẩn EU, bao gồm có kiểm nghiệm, hồ sơ kỹ thuật, DOC và người chịu trách nhiệm là bao nhiêu, và hậu quả tài chính cũng như những thương mại có thể xảy ra nếu bị phát hiện không tuân thủ sau khi đưa sản phẩm vào thị trường. Thì với câu hỏi này á, thì anh Tô Bình có nói là hậu quả về thương mại khi mà phát hiện sản phẩm không tuân thủ sau khi đưa ra thị trường thì có thể là rất lớn, bởi vì có việc thu hồi sản phẩm từ người tiêu dùng rất là tốn kém, và bạn có thể chuẩn bị yêu cầu tiêu hủy sản phẩm, và bạn có thể bị yêu cầu là ngừng bán hàng cho đến khi vấn đề được khắc phục.
Thank you, Doc. Third question here. What kinds of products or industries are under the highest surveillance risk right now? We're wanting to prioritize our budget spend when it comes to compliance spending.
Yeah, that's also a very good and relevant question. The answer is that the market surveillance authorities in Europe set priorities based on risk for products, but they also ensure that they check all sectors, all products over time. So it's a bad strategy for a manufacturer to count on not being checked, if I can put it that way.
Câu hỏi thứ ba là những loại sản phẩm hoặc ngành công nghiệp nào hiện đang chịu rủi ro giám sát cao nhất, để cho khách hàng có thể ưu tiên ngân sách về tuân thủ của khách hàng. Thì câu trả lời của Tobin là các cơ quan giám sát thị trường sẽ đặt ưu tiên dựa trên đánh giá rủi ro để đảm bảo hoạt động giám sát bao phủ toàn bộ thị trường.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. Fourth question here. Are European authorities checking for compliance documents before or after entry into the market?
Yep. Products may be sampled in two stages, you can say. One is that customs may stop consignments when they are entering into EU. So that would, strictly speaking, be before they were placed on the market. And then market surveillance authorities may sample products, but that is after they have come into the market. They will be sampled from shops or from storage facilities, but that's after they've been placed on the market.
Ok. Câu hỏi thứ tư là các cơ quan EU có kiểm tra tài liệu tuân thủ trước hay sau khi sản phẩm vào thị trường? Thì câu trả lời của Tobin là hải quan có thể yêu cầu kiểm tra tài liệu kỹ thuật khi sản phẩm được nhập khẩu, tức là trước khi được đưa vào thị trường. Và các cơ quan giám sát thị trường sẽ kiểm tra tài liệu kỹ thuật sau khi sản phẩm đã được đưa vào thị trường, nghĩa là trước và sau luôn.
Thank you, Bill Consortium. Fifth question here. This one's from a Shopify seller, so this might be an e-commerce question. We're a new Shopify seller. We worked with a few dodgy suppliers before. Do you have any tips for early detection of risky suppliers or products before ordering for the EU?
That's a very, very good question and a very cautious importer, I would say. What we would advise is that you should start by asking for technical documentation from the factory, like declaration of conformity, risk assessment for the product, and test reports. If they are not able to provide that, it may be a very good sign that it's a dodgy operator.
Okay. Câu hỏi thứ năm là chúng tôi là một bên bán hàng mới trên Shopify. Trước đây đã từng làm với một số nhà cung cấp không đáng tin. Thì có mẹo nào để phát hiện sớm những nhà cung cấp hoặc sản phẩm rủi ro trước khi đặt hàng cho thị trường EU không? Và câu trả lời của Tobin là đầu tiên thì hãy yêu cầu nhà cung cấp những tài liệu kỹ thuật như là công bố hợp chuẩn hợp quy, báo cáo thử nghiệm. Nếu họ không cung cấp hoặc là chưa thể cung cấp được, hoặc những cung cấp này bị lỗi, đó có thể là một dấu hiệu cho thấy rằng bạn không nên hợp tác với những nhà cung cấp này. Và đôi khi bạn cũng có thể trực tiếp kiểm tra sản phẩm. Nếu sản phẩm có lỗi hoặc là không đúng như về chất lượng, thì lúc đó cũng là một dấu hiệu cảnh báo.
Wonderful. I think I might add a few HQTS points here as well. As a service provider in the TRC industry, we deal with these type of situations quite often. I think whether the audience chooses HQTS or another third-party testing and inspection service, it is a good idea to have a professional service come in as an impartial party. And they come in with the expertise to do, factory audits, product inspections, testing for materials, making sure that they all comply, not just for the EU, but also for any other region you're trying to enter. We have had situations where suppliers have asked for samples, and we have done inspections on products to make sure these samples actually fit the specifications before an official order is actually placed as well. So these are all services that are currently available through HQTS and other TIC service providers. It is worth looking into because I think it will save you a lot of grief and costs later downstream. So yeah, that's number 5. So our 6th question before we answer Jade's live questions. Again, if you have any live questions, please send it through the webinar Zoom chat and we can address them after Jade's. So the 6th question here, we're a private label. How can a brand verify the factory's technical documentation without exposing trade secrets?
That's a very relevant question indeed, as we just discussed in the presentation. One thing you can do is it's about building confidence between the factory and the private label owner. As we discussed, it may be an idea that the factory can send the table of contents for the technical documentation. It may be an idea that the private label owner can go and check the technical documentation, or he can ask an inspection body to do it for him, because the inspection body would have some confidentiality obligations, so they shouldn't disclose anything. But these are some of the measures you can use to deal with this confidentiality issue.
Okay, vậy với câu hỏi số 6 là chúng tôi là thương hiệu riêng, nghĩa là private label, thì làm thế nào để một thương hiệu xác minh tài liệu kỹ thuật của nhà máy mà không tiết lộ bí mật thương mại? Thì câu trả lời của anh Tô Bình là tôi đã thảo luận về một số cách xử lý khác nhau trong cuộc hội thảo ở trước. Thì đầu tiên là việc kiểm tra mục lục tài liệu kỹ thuật, thứ hai là yêu cầu kiểm tra toàn bộ tài liệu kỹ thuật tại nhà máy, hoặc yêu cầu một bên thứ ba như là HQTS là một bên giám định hoặc là một bên thử nghiệm để xác minh những tài liệu này.
Thank you, Doc, for the translation. Question from Jade, and this is from a live chat. Are there any channels or platforms that help us verify whether our product or design comply with EU safety requirements before selling?
That's probably a question to HQTS instead, because there are no official EU bodies that must be consulted before a product can be sold in the EU. So the manufacturer would have to contact private testing laboratories or certification laboratories to help them with that task.
Maybe I'll chime in a little bit here from our perspective. I think generally speaking, there are different structures of regulation, and there are different layers of these. For most products entering the EU, you have a general overarching requirement. But then when we start talking about specific goods, it starts branching off into, consumer goods, non-consumer goods. Within consumer goods, there might be electronics, child products, food. So it really does depend on the type of product you're looking for. Of course, it can be a service like HQTS, where we help give you the requirements that you're looking, give you the requirements and legislations that you will need to comply to for the specific product and for the specific region you're entering. I hope that answers your question, Jade. I know it's a bit broad, but yeah, your question is simple, but it's not very sweet. It's very difficult to answer your question. But we do encourage you to get in touch, Jade. Feel free to drop us an email or give us a call, and maybe one of our very capable staff at HQTS can help you with a free consultation. We can also give you a free sample reports. We'll send out some free sample reports to all the registrants as well, just so you can see what a report may look like and see if it's relevant for you. Thank you, Jade. Next question we have here is from Sean. I love Sean's name, Sean King. It's very powerful. Sean asks this question. Thank you for covering the manufacturer and brand regulations. Will there also be a webinar focused on material suppliers T2 regulations? Or is there a platform where material suppliers can access this type of information?
Good question. We have planned a couple of webinars, and we haven't planned something that specifically focuses on material supplier regulations. But my intention was to discuss conformity assessment in one of the subsequent webinars. And here we will also briefly address issues related to material or to raw materials. I am not familiar with a platform where you can access this information.
Yeah, I think Sean, first of all, great question, and it is quite specific as to the information you're looking for, which is great because you know what you need. From our perspective, Torben, HQTS, SPEAC, we are looking to hold a series of webinars. Perhaps in the next one, we can incorporate material supplier T2 regulations specifically within the next few episodes. We are also inviting a few other guests. We can start looking for experts perhaps in your field where we talk about materials specifically. Now, beyond that, I'm sure there is a lot of information that SPEAC has already online. So feel free to run onto SPEAC's website and see if you can find that information. Otherwise, maybe we can schedule in a consultation with one of our HQTS staff members, and maybe they can guide you somewhere there as well. Whichever way, we'll keep in touch. Definitely, Sean. We'll keep in touch and we'll get you the information you need. Yeah. Thank you so much for your question, Sean. Are there any other live questions from the chat? If there aren't any other questions that come up now, feel free to send us an email. We can address some of your questions privately at a later time. So maybe not anything now if it doesn't come to mind, but if anything does come into mind a bit later on, feel free to email us. Without further ado, I might thank everyone for joining this webinar. It's been very informative, as always, with SPEAC. Gianluca as well, thank you so much for joining us and leading the actual webinar itself. Torben, again, fantastic presentations as usual. And Duc, wonderful work with introducing our services in Vietnam, as well as giving a heartfelt translation in Vietnamese. Does anyone want to say anything else, guys, on the panel before we end the webinar?
No, from my side, I would like just to thank you all again for this opportunity. Thanks to the audience. I mean, very interesting questions. I have to say, I always learn myself listening to the question, and so also to better understand the needs to better prepare future trainings. And as you mentioned, we are pleased to confirm that this is only the first of a series of webinars that we are planning to do. So very excited to continue this collaboration, and an invitation to all the people attending to continue following our events.
Wonderful. I completely agree, Gianluca. Okay, so we'll end and conclude the webinar there. Thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully see you at the next one. The next webinar we have with SPEAC is due in October. If you have any other questions or inquiries, feel free to email us or Gianluca and Torben at SPEAC. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.